Hello there, this is How to Murder Time, a podcast about books and things.
Hello, everybody.
What?
Hello
Hey, it's the book one. Gathered our regular panel of experts to chat about another sci-fi classic. We've got Dr. Torag, hello.
Hello.
And Daze as well.
Hello.
And John as well. He sort of comes with the whole gig, really. Can't get rid of him.
I've got the recording gear.
He's got the gear, yeah. So this month in fact, we are talking about Ursula Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness, which was the Hugo winner of 1970, the award for Best Novel. I'll start by reading out the back of the book. This outstanding classic of science fiction, which won both the Hugo and Nebula Awards when first published, is the story of Winter, an Earth-like planet with two major differences. Conditions are semi-Arctic even at the warmest time of the year, and the inhabitants are all of the same sex. Tucked away in a remote corner of the universe, they have no knowledge of space travel or life beyond their own world, and when a strange envoy from space brings news of a vast coalition of planets which they're invited to join, he is met with fear, mistrust, and disbelief. Yeah, there we go. So what follows essentially is the story of Jen Lee AI, who is a lone representative of the Ecumen, which is a kind of coalition of enlightened spacefaring civilizations who's been sent to the world of Gethrin, the world of Winter, to basically make the case and make an offer for the civilizations of this world to join the celestial host, the great federation that's being built. Trouble is, this world is somewhat of a backward sort of place, quite medieval in places, a sort of mixed mishmash of technologies and feudal monarchies and such, and he's not given much help in his mission of trying to find the most enlightened civilizations and convince them of the benefits of joining the enlightened outside world. It's a sort of journey of discovery. It's a kind of a sort of trip across the world and an examination of what at first glance seems to be a somewhat human society, but which deep down has a great many almost alien differences, and generally trials and tribulations therein. So Daisy, you picked this one for us. Why did you pick this one for us? What sort of led you to this one?
Well, back in the 80s when I was a young whippersnapper and reading rather too much science fiction and fantasy, I was gifted a copy of the Earthsea trilogy with a very white character on the front cover who doesn't remotely represent Sparrowhawk and Ged. And since, unfortunately, that didn't win any Hugos, this is the closest I could come to a winner by Ursula Le Guin. So I've read it a few years ago, so I was sort of interested in rereading it, seeing how it felt. I remember sort of not quite clicking with it very well at the time, so I was sort of interested in sort of giving it another chance and sort of dipping back in sort of the format of this show, and I hoped that other people might enjoy it too.
I'd sort of coincidentally picked it up and had a go at it about 2 months ago in between books for this show, because I am an omnivorous science fiction reader, and one of these a month is not nearly enough. So I sort of managed to remember just about enough of it. I did manage to get through the whole thing. It's a tricky read though. It's not your usual fantastic daring-do tale of space laser guns and advanced computers and all the rest of it.
No, I remembered it being quite calm and quiet and sort of still.
Quite understated sort of thing.
And that was how I sort of, sometimes impressions are false, sometimes they're accurate, and that really did sort of come across in the book. It's not an adventure romp, although there's a little bit of daring do here and there. It's certain
elements of a travelogue, almost a kind of sort of considered wander through
almost a grand
countries.
Tour, a very quiet, strange grand tour through a sort of an alien world, while the lead character is going through some sort of mental reevaluation of his position in life, the universe, and everything, and how he's interacting with this alien human species around him. I think it fits into. Le Guin seems to have a sort of a universe called the Hainish universe. It's connected to a sort of some kind of space colonizing pseudo empire that I think they're kind of like a progenitor species, and this is one of the books that sort of has been slotted into that continuity. I've not read any of the other. Well, I've read one or two of the other books, but it doesn't seem to fit. It's not intended to fit into a sort of a logical stream. It is its own unit. It just it's got those back plot connections. So it mentions the Ansible and various other pieces of sort of classic pieces of SF tech.
But only as a sort of sideline. There's very much a sort of missionary feel to it, which essentially is what Jen Lee is.
Yes, yes. It's a diplomatic mission to an alien world, and I think if you do that and you sort of, there's two different type of books. You can go on a romp and sort of take people through an adventure. Here, she seems to have taken the decision to not make the story exciting. It's not quite fair, but it's quiet. It's a sort of a character study of two characters.
Yes.
Genly and Hearth, who's one of the a sort of exiled prime minister of the country that Genly first finds himself in.
So one of the natives.
Threm Hearth Rem Ear Estraven, which a lovely sort of 5-barrel name, but you quickly realise that Estraven is his sort of sub kingdom that he rules.
I thought that was his name. That's the one I fixed on.
It can get. He uses his political name, but when he gets exiled, he loses that, so people stop referring to him as that. And then Rem is I think of or Muk. Hearth is his family name, and Theron is his personal name. So, first name, second name of Estraven. So it would be Days McDays of Liverpool. You realise that quite quickly because the pattern's followed by several characters in the first.
Banks does something similar with his culture names.
Yes, but
much later.
There's no real attempt to explain it at the beginning, so you sort of deduce this, and I found that quite interesting.
Straight into it.
Yeah, it's right into the middle of the story. You don't land with Genly and you are exploring the world. He's been there like a year or a year and a half,
about
or something.
2 years in or something, and then the first you see of him, he's at some big formal occasion, which isn't very well explained. It's well described, but you're sort of lost and adrift a bit to get right from the word go.
Yes, some stories start with and you're in a battle. You're in a parade for the king who is placing a keystone in an arch.
Yeah, some sort of
it's like
supermarket opening or something.
It just sort of suggests quite a different pacing right from the beginning. I can see, particularly with the vowels that she's chosen. I kept thinking of this as basically Icelandic. And I've been to Iceland 3 times for Fanfest. God, I'm a tragic person. But so wandering around Reykjavik, looking at signs with characters I don't understand and phonemes that are very alien to me, whether it's Iceland or China, I'm kind of used to. So I didn't bounce off the what I think of as Icelandic, although it isn't. But I can see why that might be a little bit of a challenge, because it's there's some weird words in there and some odd constructions that she doesn't explain in the front. She does explain some of them at the back. There's the standard sort of fantasy sci-fi author obsessive partial appendix at the back with a few notes.
So speaking of bouncing off weird names, John, hi there. How did you get on with this?
I bounced off the weird names quite badly.
So what did you think? I've sort of had a quick read through, because we have a collaborative document where we're all chipping in notes during while we read it, and I was reading some quite critical things coming from your corner there, John.
Is ARG critical?
It is when it's the name of the king.
This is a weird book. Half the names, it suffers from that old school fantasy thing of, I'm going to make the names stand out and be different and have that. This is obviously alien and different and not where you are.
Do you think this would not have worked, or would have been better if they were all called Bob and Sue and the town was called Kingdomshire or something?
Well, I think that
Steve.
There are other examples of more successful authors, and she is a tremendously successful author, but someone like Tolkien who does a similar thing but had a lot more flowing skill to the names that made it stand out a lot more and still be readable. And this just feels old because of it.
Yeah, well, it is about 45 years old. This is 1970. It won its award. I think it was published the year before. But
not all the books we've read have felt old. We did.
We've had some older stuff that's felt.
We did Bester, which didn't feel that old.
Yes, yeah.
And this really does feel like it is old school fantasy.
See, that's an interesting keep using the word fantasy. This is ostensibly a science fiction award novel. I mean, does it really sort of blur the line and sort of call into question what we even mean with science fiction and fantasy? There's this, because I mean, she's sort of probably, I don't know, perhaps more well known for the Wizard of Earthsea and the Earthsea young adult fiction there, which is very much a sort of traditional swords and sorcery type of thing, but
Well,
with wizards and
the
monsters
sci-fi
and so on.
fantasy thing has always been a suspect line drawn in the sand, just because we can draw a line in the sand. And
Was it because a quote? I think it's Sam Delaney. Fantasy is what is not. Sci-fi is what could be, and horror is what must not be.
yes,
Yeah. So perhaps it's not that helpful to be drawing arbitrary lines, whether they've got magic wands or laser swords or whatever. But it has.
Sci-fi is all sci-fi is fantasy, but not all fantasy is sci-fi.
Right.
No,
yeah.
there's that
Sci-fi is
aspect
a
of
subdivision of
feasibility.
fantasy.
Venn diagram.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Hang on, I'm drawing circles here. Right.
well, that's
Tarek.
the other example of another fantasy sci-fi product by somebody who famously can't write for toffee, which is Star Wars, and yet still the names all manage to flow.
Yeah.
They're all
so it's
stupid.
more of just a linguistic thing
Yeah.
than a sort of genre
And
sort of
it's that
definition.
little speed bump every so often on the page.
And so
which-
within the first chapter or two, that
Oh.
just sort of derailed you a bit, did it?
Yeah, and I never quite got back into it. I suspect this is a book I could get into given the right run-up in the future.
Have you got like a Kindle version or something? Because you could just run a find and replace in Word or something. Just change all the names to Bob, Sue, and Mary, and
It's tempting, actually.
see if it scans any better.
John Smith, envoy of the Council of the
Space
Imperial Republic.
Empire.
Yes.
Of Basingstoke. Yes.
So, Tarek, how did you get on? What did you make of all
Well,
this?
I agree with John rather more than I do with Days, I'm afraid. My first note is there's a lot of the dingly dang of the fingly fong in this book.
So again, the sort of the sort of quirky naming,
Yeah.
and weird syllables, sort of
It would
throwing
be-
you.
It'd be better to have a limited number of consonant explosions so we can get used to them. Because it wasn't just that there were stupid letter combinations that were supposed to identify for things, but they use them once, then throw them away and come up with a new complete explosion of letters for the next thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a sort of long-term sort of swords and sorcery trashy novel reader, and I'm okay with weird syllable explosions and stuff. But I think you got the point there is that there's so many that hit you so early on, and because it is an in media res, I think they call it, basically a straight bang open into the middle of it all. You don't get a chance to learn and associate people with names and stuff, and it can be a bit confusing. But
Yeah,
by
they
the
do-
time
Well, part of
before
me
you get
thinks
into
that
it.
she's doing that deliberately. You're landing
trying to deliberately culture
well,
shock
yes,
you.
because the plot is based around Genli I basically being culture shocked and steadily adapting.
But as you say,
And
he's been
one way
there
of
for 2
landing
years.
the characters in the midst of that. Yes, but he still is. That's
after
the odd
2
thing.
years,
Yeah.
he's
still not got it, has he?
Yeah.
So one way of doing that to the characters is land them in the middle of a great consonant explosion, perhaps, and go, well, hello, adapt. That can work with some people better than others. Everybody has a sort of different approach to names and fantasy. Not
The
that this
recommendation is grab them with the first sentence or grab them with the first paragraph. This didn't grab me after a chapter. It was just sort of, I don't really want to see somebody cleaning the roads and,
There was
cutting
it was a really intricate examination of Carhide. I think the first kingdom where we first meet Genli, and he spends a good couple of chapters at the start there, just basically sort of pottering about in this kingdom. Essentially, he's sort of been put on hold, as it were, for his audience with the king to try and get on with his mission, which is to try and convince this kingdom to sign up for the big space empire. But he's sort of basically been stalled by upper court political intrigues, and you get the sense that no one really in this court actually believes he is who he says he is anyway. He's just an interesting madman that they keep around. And so the first sort of 5 or 6 chapters is him basically sort of just pottering around this town and sort of talking to people and going to lunch and stuff. And that serves as a really good introduction to the culture of it all. And you can tell there's a real sense, and I get this from the Wizard of Earthsea novels as well, is that Le Guin is a fantastic world builder. She really sort of crafts her settings and wants to show them off, wants to explain and show them to you. And there is a lot of that early on, but
from a personal
that does
point-
need to be sewn together with a sort of bit more of a pacey narrative, I suppose.
Yeah, from a personal point of view, if you're going to do that for the first 3 chapters, I would need Jen Lee, this main character who's going to be leading us through it, to either be writing sarcastic comments, either be cynical and sarcastic or lost or something. He's a bit of a non-entity, and you need I feel
Certainly
that you
near the
needed a
start,
stronger
yeah.
personality to carry me through the somewhat unexceptional
A sort of
environment.
commentator, a sort of narrator of sorts. shots, and mostly it is straight through the lens, and he's just looking around at stuff. I mean, the character generally himself, he does go on a sort of something of a journey, but it's not a staggering, heroic journey of complete self-discovery and transformation. He's essentially himself at the end of it all, but with a sort of greater understanding of what's going on, and it's a gradual thing.
Yeah, I think he, from other books that are like this, he needed somebody to talk to if it's a sort of a laptop or something that will talk back to him, so he can speak as someone from another world about what's weird about this world, rather than just never. Because
Well, this is one of the things I found really sort of fascinating about it all, and done very well, is the utter isolation that Jen Lee is experiencing because of reasons which I'm still not personally convinced with. This magic space empire, the Ecumen, have decided that the best way to not freak out the natives is to just send one bloke on his own with no technology and no, not even really any concrete evidence that the space empire is even up there. So he just goes there. The Ecumen send explorers first, who sort of go in stealth and scope out the world, find out the politics and the land masses and stuff, and then they send an envoy, and Jen Lee is the envoy. And the envoy is basically just dropped off on his own with no sort of magic gadgets, no sort of brain upload full of facts or anything like that. Nothing that he could concretely show the natives to back up his story that he is from space. And
it's like they don't even want to succeed.
It's almost like a sort of crazy Star Trek Prime Directive thing, but gone really, really over the top.
Yeah. He's got himself who is examined, and he becomes part of the evidence that look, I'm a space alien. How can you tell?
Look, his biology's different.
Yes,
and so he willingly submits to sort of medical examination, and it's lucky they don't just chop him up and put him in vats, put him in pickled jars. So, and then that lends a bit of credence, but even 2 years in, we get the sense that this court mostly don't believe him and are just using him as a kind of pawn in their own little games. They're not that impressed with the big space empire idea at all.
True of
and he's
both the
been put on
nations
hold.
we see, isn't it?
So what you end up with, and it's exactly as you say there, Tarag, it would be a different story and perhaps a more flowing and interesting one if he had I don't know, just a little AI assistant he chats to or something. But it's almost I guess it's done as a deliberate thing, and you end up following this character who is utterly alone and a lot of the time not terribly in control of what's going on. And so that sense of isolation, a stranger in a strange land, the sort of alien amongst the normal people, which is a sort of role reversal of the alien visitor from space visiting Earth. It's an Earthman is the alien, is really effectively carried all the way through, I think.
It's a clever conceit, it's a clever construction, but it just makes it difficult for me personally to have any interest in the story.
Oh yeah.
Because I've got nobody to listen to.
It makes it a cold and quite grim story in a lot of places, because he's basically just been buffeted about and has no one to call on, no help, no one's coming, and he's not really, I don't know, not terribly capable, it seems, a lot of the way through. Things tend to happen to him. He's not really a determinator. He doesn't go and do things and sort stuff out. He sort of just bimbles about, waits for
used
audiences.
As a political pawn by
two different
the King of
nations.
Karhide or the or I can never pronounce this one correctly. Orgarain, yes, the other. Yes, it's
something like that.
Communist secret police state.
Yeah.
I think, Days, you said it was cold. The sort of the way it was written, and the word I came up with was detached. It felt detached. The storytelling felt like you were somebody telling a story that they weren't terribly interested in. I think a conceit, but it felt like that.
I think part of it. I think she's written it very intentionally in a very sort of slow, steady, in sort of intentional way, and I think that produces the effect that you're experiencing. That it's if that pacing, if that sort of that quite slow rhythm doesn't make you lock into it and go that's something quite different, and you sort of, it becomes a sort of a beautiful, strange but beautiful gem, which is sort of how I sort of felt about
beauty
it.
To it,
but it then sort of forces you into detachment, and then you lose the connection, and then there's no way back in. So
quite a contemplative and introspective experience. I
think the effect is intentional, but then she has to take responsibility for, yes, you can do that, but yes, you will, alienate or detach from a certain percentage of people who may. appreciate it differently if you'd
So
approach it differently.
So John was saying he's going to redo the Kindle so that all of the names were, Jeff from Basingstoke or whatever. I'd be very interested in that because I got so lost trying to translate the sentences, I completely missed the story.
To be fair, I suspect it wouldn't make. I suspect that that you're not bouncing off. Sorry, I shouldn't speak for you, but I suspect that you're not bouncing off the words. Yes, that's certainly an aspect, but I think it's the rhythm and the pace which is having this alienating effect. Because I think the language is beautiful, but I can absolutely see in it the things you're describing. There's some wonderful sort of humorous, clever things, even in the first paragraph. Even in the first sort of chapter, as the king's doing his masonry work. And as I've just got it on the screen now, so the king seems to be finished with his masonry work because Genly's got quite frustrated at waiting to get off this bloody platform. But crossing under the rise of the arch on his spiderweb of planks, he starts on the other side of the keystone, which after all has two sides. It doesn't do to be impatient in Carhide. They're anything but a phlegmatic people, yet they are obdurate. They are pertinacious. They finish plastering joints. It's sort of a remorseless sentence. It's going to be making a funny comment, but it just keeps going through this beautiful language. But it takes time to get there, and it's simultaneously quite gorgeous. There's bits like that all the way. I kept going back through in paragraphs and rereading, not because I'd got lost, but just because that was beautiful again and again and again.
Yeah, I mean, when Genly's going off to visit the hinterlands before he ends up getting exiled across to the other country, you sort of he's sort of on the road train, and you get in some of the cross-country wilderness of ice and so on, and the visit in the shrine where he meets the sort of weird group of fortune tellers, and that sort of vision thing.
There are bits of the book that speak to me because the paragraph Days was quoting from there carries on with a bit that goes, "But I am bored and hot." And I thought, yes, so there's something for everybody.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, sometimes they get to the point quickly, but not often. Yeah, and I think a lot of it's like that. She I don't remember, and I've read the Earthsea books more recently than I'd originally read this. I don't remember Earthsea feeling like that. I remember it's still having some of the same aspects, the sort of the beautiful sense of poetry, but I remember it being accessible and a much more immediate delight. Here she's chosen, I think, a sort of a writing style and a story style that's as you were saying, it's
from
cold,
the Earthsea stuff
isolated.
We know she can do.
It's very mannered and planned, which I think is. I mean, it's probably post hoc justification. I think that goes something towards the character of the Gathenians themselves. That this is a world which is seems to spend 75% of its time in winter, if not more.
It's essentially an ice age.
Yeah, and faffing about. It gets you killed.
Yes, that sort of. So we've got the Gathenians. The Gethren. I don't know whatever the phrase is, but the natives of this world. So it's sort of implied, but not terribly explained. She doesn't really do much in the way of techno babble at all. There's just peripheral mentions of this is the way things are, and isn't that interesting sort of thing. We get hints that they've been sort of genetically engineered by some precursor race, probably this Hainish lot, at some point in the distant past, and they were originally humans and originally normal. Well, I say normal, the basic normal human form, and had been adapted for cold weather living, but also this whole sort of non-gender thing going on. So basically, as far as I understood,
ambisexual.
Ambisexual, yes. So is it for like 90% of the time they are essentially hermaphroditic neuter, and then for like 1 month every so often, is it
2 to 3 days? Every lunar month.
Every lunar month, they arbitrarily become male or female, and that's not a predisposed. They're always going to become female, or they're always going to become male. It's essentially a random thing. So, and
then they have to shag or die.
Yes, and then that's how the offspring occur. That's how the race procreates, and so on. So, essentially, what we got here and I imagine this would have been the big shocking thing about the book when it was first written and first published, and people were first reading it. Is this whole planet of essentially hermaphrodites, and what does that do to society and relationships and interpersonal sort of relationships and bonds and so on? The sort of exploration of that, coupled with that. You've got two motivating forces which make this such a sort of alien experience for Genly. Is that you got the whole sort of chemering and the sort of essentially no one is really male or female, and Genly's constantly applying gendered labels to people, when he's thinking about it, he's sort of just forcing the term him on people, and then getting cross and surly when he detects feminine characteristics in people, because he's a little bit of a misogynist himself. And
yes,
then,
he doesn't start off terribly enlightened, does he? I think he becomes more, but he is prone to sort of seeing somebody behaving in what he sees as, I think he uses the word effeminate frequently. These effeminate tendencies, and just doesn't.
And that is a sort of negative
like
in his
it.
eyes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But then on the other hand, you got this essentially barren, death trap wasteland of a world, which has essentially modified both physically and psychologically this population of people, and it permeates their society, their way of life, and how they do things. Because people die if you muck up, if you don't share the resources properly, if people steal from each other, you're condemning them to a sort of frozen death. There's essentially two different drivers, and it's hard to tell at any given moment through the story which of the two main drivers is responsible for this society being the way it is, and which particular parts. I mean, we're told that this society has never had wars, despite having nation states and so on, and that could be partly because they're just really inefficient in those kinds of freezing temperatures, or it could be that because there are no men and no women, then somehow that sort of dispels tribal violence and stuff. I wasn't too convinced on that side of things.
No, because it's described as that, there's plenty of one-on-one.
They will fight each other individually.
Assassination, and small skirmish actions, but there's just never been a full 1,000-on-1,000 war.
I think this is one of the things that dates the book. Actually, is the view that
70s
that was
politics.
Probably very popular in the 70s. That if a woman was in charge, there wouldn't be a war.
Yeah, I'm wondering how much.
We now know that is untrue.
Yes,
because when Thatcher was in charge, we had a war. So we know it's not true.
Well,
but until that happened,
there's a difference between woman in charge and women in charge.
but it was believed that would be the sort of the cure-all that would fix all of man's evils by making a woman in charge. And it's probably not viewed as much true now as it was then.
So in the introduction to the edition that Torag and I have, there's a section where she actually describes how she constructed the book. It's really interesting to sort of get an idea of how it was.
I've got very cheap paperback here with nothing in the front.
I quite like the way she assembles it, because she starts off by describing her original story, that's the one she remembers, about how she assembled it, and she decided to do this exploration of gender and society and what have you. And actually she did some research into her own pieces of paper, and that's not how it happened at all. She had a story about an ice planet where there was no war, and it just sort of wasn't quite working out. And she felt there was something missing. She wanted to do something. It was sort of something to do with the inhabitants, and she decided, right, if we make them, if this ambisexual, this sort of time sexuality thing, introduce that. What does that say? What does that say about gender relationships?
That certainly made this a distinctive and memorable book. Yeah, the addition of that.
Yes. But it's quite interesting getting an insight. I mean, it's after the event. The author is dead, although thank God she isn't. But we have to deal with what's on the page. But it's interesting to see what she seemed to be intending, but it's not what she remembers. I love that unreliable authorial voice. It's not what I remember. But
you sort of assume that the author has the final say on it if they don't fully remember either.
Each time you remember something, you actually rewrite it.
Yes.
Oh God.
Whatever you do, don't think, oh God.
That's why I'm deliberately so forgetful. I'm preserving those memories for the future or something.
That's why I've been programming you for years.
You do what?
Yeah. So the sexual relationship parts, the actual chemering.
I was a bit relieved, to be honest. I sort of knew a bit about the basic premise of this book, and I thought, this is all going to be a bit squicky. But it's not really gone into in any horrifically graphic detail at all. It's all sort of very coquettish, very behind closed doors, very sort of muted, and you sort of almost get the sense that sex and romance and passion are just generally much more low key on this planet than is normal for human beings anyway. Partly because of the weather and so on.
There's an add-on short story she wrote a few years after the original, where she sort of addresses some of the criticisms, effectively, of this of the book, which is that most of the characters present themselves pretty much as male and in male roles. That if you're writing a book where anybody can be any gender can perform any societal role, then actually most of the things that we see, the characters, the Cathenians are sort of assumed male by the lead narrator, and they're behaving in quite sort of stereotypical male politician.
It seems like the society and the structure of it has a lot of power-driven male-type roles that generally is seeming to have to interact with kings and councillors and all that sort of thing.
And she doesn't actually take us into those more characteristically female roles very much in this book at all, which is, I think, why she wrote.
I think his landlady gets mentioned early on.
Yes,
as a sort of
quite
example,
sweet, isn't it?
But, and again, that's just landlady is just a term that generally is applying because he doesn't, he can't, he just all the way through the book, he can't just sort of break free of the labelling male or female in his own mind, and I suppose we'd have trouble as well in that kind of environment.
Yeah.
I think calling babies it until you know what gender they're going to be is a perfectly valid thing to do, and
Sometimes until they're 18.
well, quite. Somebody I know always calls babies it until she knows their name and therefore knows what gender they are. They're always called it. And it sometimes causes offence.
I was watching just tangenting wildly. I was watching an episode of Horizon recently, and I think it was about sort of examining about gender and physiology and psychology and so on. And they were doing all sorts of experiments where they just dressed 1-year-old babies arbitrarily in blue and pink clothing, and then got various adults to come in and play with them. And they were instantly, just because they were dressed in pink, were assuming it was a little girl, and you can't tell till they're about 3 or 4. And it was just fascinating how this sort of stuff's hardwired, sort of societally.
I think at birth you can tell from the skeleton if they're male or female, but soon after birth, until about puberty, the skeletons are the same.
Examining the skeleton gets you framed.
Yeah.
Also, there are quicker ways
I'm
to
not
tell
allowed
than
there again.
investigating the skeleton at that point.
Anyway, yes.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things that with the sort of sexual activity in the society, so takes place on a sort of personal timed basis. Everybody, people have cycles effectively.
They have their own cycles, or is this a universal?
Independent cycle. So you can aim your cycle to sort of if there's somebody you like enjoy going into Kema with, you can sort of try and stay synced up with somebody, which is strangely familiar.
The sort of during Kema, when you come down as male or female depends on who else is around you as in Kema as well. So
how
tends towards
how people
compatible pairings.
But I wrote some notes here, and it's sort of the activity in public Kema houses seems to be an entirely normal, healthy thing. This isn't that people go away and do something very embarrassing once a month and come back out. It's normal. It's healthy. It's what you're expected, encouraged to participate, but you're not forced to. It's pretty much sort of once a month. There's as much sex, drugs, and rock and roll as you can get, and as you feel like you want to participate in. And to be honest, I was checking when this was published and sort of comparing this to bathhouse culture in the United States. I was thinking, did you have some gay friends? I just wonder. But it's quite refreshing that it's dealt with quite tastefully in the main book. In the short story she added on, she's a bit more upfront with what goes on in the Kema house, and you can sort of the at least her view of the society isn't that these are passionless people or that it's hidden away. It's all that love, passion, and falling in love with the world is focused into just a few days of a monthly cycle.
So it becomes a bit more intense, and people are generally a bit more low-key and dour the rest of the time.
It was written at a time when hippies were, a thing. There's a very hippie attitude there.
Yes, but it's just quite refreshing and quite it's a refreshing difference, at least to the way a lot of the way that sort of sexuality is treated in our current society. I found that forced difference, that confronting it and sort of dealing with it, quite a interesting.
I was thinking this was quite. Was this sort of intended to be a portrayal of what it must be like to be transgender in a society of, was it cisgender, normal people, whatever you call them? So basically, with generally being the sort of weird outsider that everyone's sort of slightly scandalised by. Was there some sort of attempt to explore real life alienation, or was that something that's perhaps applied to it later?
I think it's applied to it later because she did say later on that she apologised for the fact that there were no homosexual couplings in this society, even though gender was something that swapped around a lot.
Yes.
they were all heterosexual when they reached their sexual.
She was definitely writing in to effectively mainstream science fiction readers from that point of view.
I suppose the whole sort of ambigender thing would have been scandalous enough at the time.
She was going so far, and I suspect that her mind took her to where she was comfortable, and she wrote from that place. It's like authors who sort of, it's like dear Mr. Heinlein, he's imagining the future, and he ends up writing some rather terrifyingly sexist and indeed quite frightening bits and pieces. He takes himself into the future. So I think any author has limits on where they can go.
I suppose, but exploring conventional ideas and the boundaries of.
But the journey's gone further since then. Was one of the things she said that she'd do things slightly differently now. This was definitely of a point in time.
Thinking about this aspect of the novel and the comparisons I was coming up with, essentially Banks's culture, who essentially it's a sort of utopian post-scarcity science fiction future empire, space empire thing, where everyone can change gender essentially at will. They sort of just kick off an internal hormonal process, and a couple of months later they're the other gender. And so when you have a society where if one gender is being particularly downtrodden upon, if you give everyone the ability to switch to the better gender, then the whole thing becomes out in the open and self-correcting, and that kind of thing. And also ancillary justice and Lecky's
yes,
which was I saw your notes on that as well, and so I still don't quite understand with ancillary justice the protagonist Breck, who's a sort of essentially a kind of automaton robot type creature, and applies the gender term her to everything and everyone. And I couldn't work out if that was essentially a societal thing or whether that was just the protagonist it was literally gender blind and couldn't work out.
That's a combination of Rajai society where gender is not important for promotion or anything.
Right.
It's not a differentiator, and Rajai language, which only has the default female pronoun. So it dodges the problem, which follows which.
They are sort of male and female making up that society, but we never really get to find out which.
Conventional member of Rajai society there. So when she's consonant explosion and Anandamyatna I think I got that right.
I've never heard that pronounced before.
I listened to the audiobook, so it's rather cheating. But Anandamyatna I and the other Syverson and the various other Rajai characters who are on her crew, she's referring to them as she, and they're referring to her as she. It's all that's sort of consistent.
If you don't sort of think about it and concentrate, you just sort of build up a picture of an entire science fiction universe entirely populated by women.
Yeah, and that in terms of reading, the use in ancillary justice felt a lot more jarring to me, because reading, and everybody's female, and I'm sitting there struggling to go, well, what gender are they? Because people do have gender. It is occasionally obliquely referred to.
But that's an interesting comparison, because that's very contemporary. It's only like 2 or 3 years old, those books, and Banks's culture stuff is probably about the only sort of things I've seen really explore this kind of gender politics in science fiction.
Playing with language, whereas
and then we have
the inverse of.
Meanwhile, back in 1970, Left Hand of Darkness is really sort of digging into it and having a good old rummage around, as it were. So,
but it's also a bit like German and French people learning English, where they're going, but what gender is this table? What gender is this dog? They don't. And we have exactly the same problem the other way with language. There's genders in foreign languages that we're completely blind to.
There's a sort of difference between language, which is what we have in the ancillary justice and stuff, whereas in Left Hand it is actually that the
physiology.
Physiology, It's fascinating seeing the contrast, and over such a wide span of time as well. It's 45 years ago.
One's culture and physiology, the other one's culture and language, and plus Rajai society has more tea. Although, to be fair, there's actually quite a bit of tea and beer on the glacier. So I was wondering when I was reading that, I was wondering it was Anne Leckie making a reference to this with all of the damn tea and gloves?
Making quite a lot of references to this, as she was.
Yes.
So we get the sort of the midsection of the book is a whole load of political shenanigans in Carhide, which forces Genly to basically defect across the border to the neighbouring sort of kingdom, which is very much a kind of communist kind of, I don't know, I was picking up USSR sort of Soviet style sorts of things going on here. Do you think that was a conscious thing? I mean, I saw some commentary elsewhere that was suggesting that Carhide was a kind of pre-World War II Germany, and that the sort of the shifty, sinister minister fellow who ousted Estraven was some kind of Hitler type analogue, and then sort of later into his adventures in the supposedly initially welcoming sort of Soviet analogue kingdom, Genly ends up falling from grace and being the victim of some nasty political games and ending up in what essentially amounts to a gulag in a sort of Siberian wilderness.
Yeah, it's from some
and
of the
that's
stuff
some
that
pretty brutal, gritty stuff.
Yeah,
that
Half says later that it's intended to be fairly civilized, and because cold, low food, and the drugs that Genly's being fed, the Cathenians are fine with that. That they'll survive unless they're really ill. So it's not.
But it's a horrific kind of slavery from a sort of objective viewpoint.
Absolutely, yeah. Particularly the journey there with the
back of the metal truck, with no clothes, people dying in the car. It's very cattle wagons, very close to the mark, kind of Second World War.
Keeping warm at the centre of a cluster of steadily diminishing people. It's quite harrowing, that trip.
Yes,
it does feel, as you say, it does feel rather concentration camp. Although it's not quite supposed to be from the point of view of the civilization prepared.
It's cold and are fine with the drugs they're giving you and stuff, then perhaps it's not so bad. But yeah,
it's killing Genly very quickly.
Yes, he's not in any position to make a heroic breakout or anything, and it's actually Estraven who sort of throws off all his own societal conventions, starts stealing food from outposts and rescues him, and then they take off on a sort of trek across the Arctic ice to get clear and try and get to the original kingdom again. And so it turns into, again, I'm picking up sort of Shackleton and sort of polar explorers. Absolutely Gerard's Worst Journey in the World. It's not a fiction novel. It's a sort of a memoir from one of the Scots expedition, which was just brutal, cold, hardship,
It's
cold.
It's about 30% of the book they spend from the rescue from the
sort of last camp, main section,
and they come off the glacier into Carhide at the end. It's a really big chunk of the book, and the language and the environmental descriptions that have gone so far.
Very powerful.
I feel if there's a bit that people are likely to respond to, it's the poetry of the ice, and the volcanoes and everything.
But also we get this sort of closening a bond between Genly and Estraven as well, and that's it's full of pangs of longing and misunderstanding, and generally trying to understand what love can possibly mean between two physiologically incompatible creatures, and sort of exploring their own feelings about each other. Some of it told from Estraven's viewpoint as well, in interspersed chapters. So,
the
very
book's constructed
powerful,
with
very interesting.
Most of it's Genly, but some of it's Hearth, and some of it's some sort of folk stories that have been sort of woven into that are sometimes referred to in the main body of the text. But it's an interesting mix.
Have so much time for those, but
fair enough. But it is beautiful, and that's the deepening of understanding, of putting basically the two characters who have got the most chance of understanding or wanting to understand each other, basically in on a sledge, or in the ice, and they have to talk to each other. They finally get past some of the barriers that societal convention and this wonderful chef Griffel, yes. God knows, but
pronunciation unit.
That's still not. I wrote some notes about what it might be, and I think it's one of those things that if you're, I think that's true of a lot of cultures. If you're not part of the culture, then you can understand bits of it abstractly, but you don't get
to be a kind of honour, stroke face, stroke understanding, stroke something or other status.
There was a section of something about not wanting to be seen to lower the status or assume incapacity of somebody, because to do so would lower your own status. So there's a I can't help you by being obvious and actually stating outright. So surely you know that. So I need not to say something to avoid embarrassing myself by embarrassing you. There's a strange sort of commensality kind of thing going on there.
So it's a sort of cornerstone of their civilization is that it's terribly bad manners to mansplain to anyone.
Yes. So as a result, when you've got somebody who's desperately wants to try and understand in the form of Genly, basically
Yeah.
really hoping that somebody would explain anything to him.
Yeah,
and
the entire
Hearth
society
can't.
thinks it would be disrespectful to explain stuff to him because
I'm sorry, I can't explain this disaster that's just happened because it would be impolite.
It
but
will
it would be really
patronise you.
helpful.
Yeah, and so they end with a sort of constant sense that he's just being buffeted about not understanding anything really. Even towards the end, I mean, spoiler alert, here we go, he does survive, he gets to the end. And then there's a sort of little chapter at the end, an epilogue set 2 years afterwards. He's finally as a last resort, and he does eventually call the big spaceship, because there's a big spaceship that he got there from another planet on, and they don't have fast and light travel, so they've been in sleeper pods for years to get there. They do have fast and light communication, so they've got this Ansible thing, and they can basically have chats with other planets, but going to any other planet is a real hardship. But the rest of his crew are all sat in this magical, fantastic spaceship orbiting the star, and eventually, for just, because he's just reached the end of his rope, essentially, he calls the spaceship down, and then, it picks up, and, just the appearance of the spaceship is enough to sort of win over everyone and satisfactorily complete his mission. But he'd not really gotten to the point where he'd convinced any governments that, it was a good idea to join. So, in a way, he sort of failed because he couldn't do it through the power of just argument alone. But yeah, he calls down the big spaceship, and the life still goes on. There's no massive transformative, renaissance or anything, as far as I can tell.
Well, it's just sort of in the process. It's an information exchange, isn't it? Because I think Genly explains that the Acumen isn't a military empire. If you've not got FTL, you can't have meaningful military incursions.
But you can explain concepts and science and blueprints to each other, that kind of thing. So they'll help each other, I suppose. But
it's a clever way to create an empire if you don't allow physical sort of movement between places. Every
or at
least
least it's very, very difficult and arduous.
Gets its own independence still.
It's a cultural empire, an empire of knowledge, isn't it?
Which is interesting,
social control. But the science fiction elements in here, that knowledge that could be shared. I sort of took a list, and there's some electrically powered transport, road trains, tracked things. There's nothing flying. Apparently, there's no flying animals of any type. There may be insects, but it doesn't specify. There's no large animals of any type. There's no large mammals. So the Gethenians are unique on their world. There's no sort of I evolved from
the
land.
biosphere is quite limited just because it's so damn cold all the time.
So they don't have a word for fly. It's
implied the Gethenians were sort of planted there by precursors anyway, and are not actually native to this world. So
there's radio and there's some references to television, but it's less popular than radio. But you've got stoves, sort of plasma stoves with year-long batteries, 14-year-long batteries that can just pump out heat and light as much as you want. So while Genly and Hearth are going across the ice, the thing they're not at risk of is freezing to death in their tent.
Yeah.
Apart from the fact that Genly needs it hot, and Hearth, who is physiologically adapted to cold, needs it cool. And if you satisfy one, you'll kill the other. So they go across. Neither of them are comfortable going across. One's sweltering, one's freezing, which is a lovely, the unhappy medium. There's some sonic guns and some sort of metal bullet guns. There's truth drugs and chemosuppression drugs.
You get the impression that it's sort of almost like I don't know, sort of kind of, I suppose, sort of somewhere between First and Second World War technology just starting to ramp up because there's border posts being built and there's tensions going up.
Yes,
so so you're sort of wondering why the Acumen are even interested.
It's the society. I think it's just mentioned the society's been stable for a long, long time, and things have been invented, but they just it just ambled along, maybe getting steadily more sophisticated, and maybe there's an inflection point coming, which I'm sure the intervention of an interstellar empire that's going to flood them with scientific knowledge, I'm sure that won't do any harm. It's almost like a sequel to this could involve all-out intercontinental war, but it's ended the point before it gets complicated.
But it's probably a deliberate. The belief is that wars are what encourage in sort of changes in technology and advancement in technology. And if this has never had war, then
they
never
invent
gets
what they need to survive, and then they're just happy with it for thousands of years.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
They need a good war. Probably.
Is that the takeaway? I was trying to work out what the overall takeaway or messages were from this, but I don't even think. Perhaps it had some that were very subtle, but it's not really a book that sort of seems to set out and say, right, here is a thing I believe in, and I'm now going to demonstrate why over a number of chapters.
It's almost a thought experiment, isn't it? If I write a story in a slightly peculiar way about society in this context, what happens? How does the clockwork unwind? And I find that That's sort of the essence of good science fiction
Yeah,
to me.
absolutely.
The
I totally
commitment
agree.
to taking, seeing what happens. And I mean, yeah, sure, it would be better if it had been maybe slightly less polysyllabic and a bit more engaging for some of our readers. But at least she went there. She took it to a sort of a
It does
logical
seem
place.
internally consistent. It seems believable within its own context. Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
it is of its time, and we are now 40 years later.
Yes.
Society has changed. Women are rather more liberated than they were when this was written, but it's the journey
context is
is still
everything, yeah.
ongoing. Yeah, it's not like we've solved all problems, but we have changed.
So that's summing up then. So John, what did you think of? What did you think of what you got through anyway, and what could be done to improve it? Do you think?
I suspect it's a book that if I listen to an audiobook with a good performance, I would like an awful lot more than the print one.
The BBC's got a 2-hour radio drama of it, which I listened to yesterday. It's really, really good, and it's a lot more brisk.
There's a certain amount of abridgment, I guess. But...
Oh yes, yeah, they do. It's quite cleverly abridged. You could see them slicing through one character and slicing off half of the other, and just seamlessly joining two together. And thought that's very well done, BBC.
Yeah. But you get the general, the important points, as it were.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
Okay,
I think even an unabridged thing would be, with the right reader, I think it would be a lot more approachable than the book is, because I think you really have to be in the mood for the book.
So a lot of your problems were essentially structural, literally the writing itself, rather than the sort of story or the journey or the characterizations or whatever.
Yeah, I was really interested in the story, just not enough to get past the structure.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I'd got to the expedition across the ice, because that sounded interesting. And I had crashed and burnt. I did attempt to read this on 12 separate occasions.
Oh, bless you.
And bounced off every time. And on several occasions, I looked at where I'd got to and then realised that I'd need to start again at where I'd started that time, because none of it had gone in.
Yeah. Oh, that's terrible.
So-
I know what you mean. Yeah, that's sort of, oh God, what did I just read? As whole goes through, and nothing. It takes a while to pick up again. Yeah.
It came as a real shock when I realised I was sort of over a quarter of the way through, because it felt like I'd either read the whole thing many times or I hadn't really started. And both
It
of
isn't
those
a
were
particularly long book, to be fair to it.
No, it's not.
But
No.
but
It's very
somehow it manages
relatively
to make
slim
itself
volume.
feel that way. I can understand.
240 pages of reasonable-sized writing.
I will look out for that BBC sort of
I really
radio
did.
play. I think it might suit me better.
Yeah. As far as I could tell, other than very clever abridgment, they didn't take any liberties. It's really good, and plus the pronunciations are awesome.
So I'm just having a quick look at the.
Who knows whether they're correct? But
at the wiki page for Hugo Award for Best Novel, the table, and she's the first female winner of this. Is that right?
yes, yeah. And Anne McCaffrey had won the novella or short story for some of the Dragonflight stories that became.
But for the best novel
Dragon series,
category,
yeah.
the first female winner.
Yeah, I checked, and she was the third woman to be nominated. The other being Marion Zimmer Bradley, about who we'd much rather forget. Another one, Andre Norton. So there's a definite trend of women being recognised, but she was the first one to actually sort of hit that top.
And so the other nominations for this year, we had Robert Silverberg with Up the Line. Anyone? No?
Time travel. I've only googled this one.
Right.
Time travel looks quite interesting. With up the line being up the line of causality. So I think that phrase is either inherited from someplace else or has sort of gone on to other science fiction references.
So we've got Piers Anthony with Macroscope.
I vaguely remember that as being one that didn't make me wince and doesn't have too many puns in.
With Piers Anthony, normally the first book of any series is clever and interesting, and then he just reuses the same joke for another 20 books. So hopefully Macroscope was the beginning of a story.
We also had Kurt Vonnegut with Slaughterhouse 5. There was a fantastic audio reading of that I've listened to on Radio 4 a while back, and that's really good.
That is a book I love.
It is a wonderful book.
Yeah, very good.
Yes, go take a flying at a donut. Go take a flying at the moon. Yes,
Billy
it's wonderful.
Pilgrim has come unstuck in time. Yeah.
There's a film of that, isn't there?
I
Slaughterhouse
don't know.
Five.
I've
Never seen it. It's
but I recommend that certainly. Norman Spinrad, Bug Jack Barron. I have no idea.
I googled about it. It looked apparently it was scandalous at the time. There was some sort of implied misogyny that was going on in there.
Right.
I think I've read a couple of Norman Spinrad, but that's not one of them. Unfortunately, he's quite an interesting chap.
So I think Slaughterhouse 5 could have been a contender as well, but I've not read the other three, so I don't know.
That's of all of them. That's although it's in a science fiction section here, that's a piece of literature. Well, everything Kurt Vonnegut touches is a piece of sort of respected literature, practically. I think.
So I don't know. I mean, if I'd have been voting against those two, I probably would have picked Slaughterhouse 5, to be honest. But The Left Hand of Darkness seems. Does it seem like it was a worthy winner rather than a winner of its own merit?
It feels like an important book.
Yeah, would it have been the sort of the right thing to be voting for at that time? Was it? I don't know. This is like 45 years ago. I don't imagine they had these like alt-right mobilisations going on back then.
I'm not so much surprised this won as I'm surprised that Slaughterhouse 5 didn't. Which is not to take away from this.
No,
it's just that I'm really surprised Slaughterhouse 5 didn't win, Oscars and Grammys and everything else.
See, I put in my notes, I've just got something up there, I put in my notes, not a fun book, interesting. That's what I took away from the whole thing. It was interesting and well written, and there's some fantastic pieces in it. Yeah, the journey across the ice as well. But I wouldn't say it was a rollicking yarn or a roller coaster adventure in any real sense.
It's a quiet enjoyment. I did enjoy it. I did have there are occasional moments of some quite clever humour, and it's quite fun, and some moments of joy, particularly when they off to see the Handara, the foretelling. Sequence.
Yes.
So there's some beautiful moments
that
are quite joyful
because we see a bit of brief. Summer areas where it's not quite ice everywhere.
Yes, a brief summer. Yeah,
but it's nice.
It's a cold, icy book with a sort of a species adapted to survive by being obstinate and obdurate and just remorselessly staying alive. So the book I think reflects that.
My last takeaway from this book is what I wrote at the bottom of my notes, which is ask Days all the questions.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Picking up
bravo Days.
I think you could probably rank the enjoyment of the hosts here in a very clear manner. But an interesting book. Right, better wrap up then. So next time, we've got the next one picked out. We're going to be reviewing 2001's winner, which is Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire by J.K. Rowling.
For the record, how many Harry Potter books have you read, Tim?
I have read no Harry Potter books.
Oh, this is going to be like when you read the third Ancillary Justice books without having read the second, isn't it?
I know, I'm jumping straight in at about volume 38 of a 200-book series. How far into puberty is Harry in this one, by the way?
I think this is book 4.
Right.
I think there are urges here. He starts. I think there's something. I remember him having an almost girlfriend in the movie.
Okay. See, I might have seen the movie, but they all sort of blend into each other a bit as well.
This is the one where they kill. This is the one where they kill the vampire in the film.
Still not helping. Is there something to do with Slytherins and a Hufflepuff?
Okay,
or
that's
something?
all of them. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up then. Join us next time for another book. See you later.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.